Hello, returning subscribers. So I think this year has been fairly lucrative for very popular comic book characters. But I think it's time we start looking at some other ones that I would say anybody under my age would probably not be very familiar with. And there are quite a number of them to go through. So for this review, we're first going to start with The Shadow.
Looking back. You know, currently today, viewers have it easier when it comes to entertainment. Technology has evolved so much that a lot of the things audiences see visually on screen are created using some kind of software or program. Some of them are tangible props, but majority of them today are CGI. Ignoring whether it's convincing or not, the idea of the screen has enhanced the way people visualize entertainment. At one point in time, though, there was another medium that was just as popular, that being the radio. For the first half of the 20th century, radio was the main source for pastime enjoyment. And you think like, what, talk radio? Yeah, there was some of that, but there were actually dramas played out on the radio, and all the audience would hear are different voices reading from a script in the same studio. So forget those special effects of CGI and bright visuals. Imagine looking at a wooden box and just listening. People from that time really had to use their imagination to create the storyboard they wanted to see. Today, we're just spoiled. It's all spoon-fed to us.
Not that I'm bashing it, that's just how things were done back then, and props should be given for the creativity of the time.
During that time emerged one of the most popular radio serial superheroes, The Shadow. Appearing in 1930, The Shadow became an iconic figure for its time, being originally voiced by Orson Welles. Here's what he sounded like.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
A year later, it would then get its own print in comics, featuring itself as the headliner. Now, with comic book movies being more popular than ever before, people forget that at one point comic book movies were still a risky avenue to take when it came to profitability. From the 1980s to the early 1990s, several comic book superhero films were produced in hopes of riding the coattails of the popular comic book movies that were released before them, that being Superman from 1978 and Batman from 1989. However, very few of these productions made any kind of impact, some of which even belonged to DC or Marvel.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure avid fans know which ones I'm speaking of.
With that said, it's even more obvious as to why any other comic book film without those labels barely grabbed anyone's attention. Comic book characters like the Rocketeer, the Phantom, Dick Tracy, and the Shadow were all older properties that didn't have a true home-based publishing distributor. So that was one major gap the marketing team had to overcome. Another problem was the demographic. Since all these names pertained to the generation that were in their youth at the time, making cinematic films about them 60 years later pitches your target audience somewhere between 60 and 90. Yeah, not really sure those groups of people are going to remember or have the energy to go see an action film at that age. It's a tad late. Nonetheless, making movies based on lesser-known comic book icons isn't a bad idea. In fact, that mentality is being taken up more often now, since production studios realize that if they want to compete in making comic book films, they will have to find new properties to adapt because all the big names have been given out already. Yes, for those who are unaware, Two Guns and Wanted are both based on comic books. Besides, it's important to give the undiscovered gems a look-see. They have value to them as well, even if they are considered old or unknown. Mainstream is not always the be-all and buy-all. Before this movie was made, there were other TV movies of The Shadow, but none were as visually impressive or had such a well-known cast, mainly due to budget and the time it was made. Unfortunately, even with this advantage, the film did not perform as well as Universal Pictures had hoped for, and that's taking in all factors that made up the film. Not even director Russell Mulcahy, best known for his work in the adventure film Highlander in 1986, was able to get people's attention. Then again, Highlander was also laced with a troubled marketing history, so I guess that counters that point. This was the poster used in North America for the Highlander movie. Now, please tell me how audiences are supposed to know that this is about an immortal Scottish swordsman. All it is a big giant head.
It's also important to note the fact that a week before, that same year, Disney's The Lion King was released. And we all know how successful that film was. So it's also safe to assume that also affected how much money the film made back.
But enough about the Australian guy who also directed Highlander 2: The Quickening in 1991, which nobody liked, Resident Evil Extinction, and The Scorpion King 2: Rise of a Warrior, which was a prequel sequel to a spin-off movie of a sequel franchise. This is about his better works. Overall plot and writing. The story here plays out like the radio show to some degree, where a mystery is at hand and the Shadow comes in to solve what's happening. After learning that Shiwan Khan, played by John Lone, a descendant of Genghis Khan, has come to America, the Shadow, known during the day as Lamont Cranston, played by Alec Baldwin, looks to figure out what Khan's plan is before it's possibly too late. Along the way, Cranston also meets a woman named Margot Lane, played by Penelope Ann Miller, who also happens to be the daughter of brilliant scientist Dr. Reinhard Lane, also played by Sir Ian McKellen. Penning the script to this action superhero film was David Koepp. Koepp was also the same writer behind smash hits like Jurassic Park, Carlito's Way, Mission Impossible, and Spider-Man. Being that Koepp was alone for this production and had nobody else to work with, one would think that he would have had someone look over it to make sure he didn't make any mistakes. But alas, there are. Don't get me wrong, very few screenplays are perfect, but some of these issues were a little too obvious. First, the premise itself is quite ambiguous. Shiwan Khan's plan of all things is very much like many other all-powerful villains. A homicidal maniac who's out of his mind. Never saw that coming. Aside from being a spawn of the violent warlord, there's not much else really to define the descendant of Genghis Khan. He's just blood-hungry, hoping to rack up the same body count as his predecessor as he engulfs the world. The next issue pertains to character placement and the role they serve. Some characters just don't have much to do, even though they are a main character. The thing is, if they are important, give them something to do, or at least a reason why they're important. In this movie, Margot Lane has telepathic abilities and can have visions that pertain to other characters. As to how she obtained these powers is never explained. They just kind of happen, and that's frustrating because it doesn't make a lot of sense. She also plays a typical love interest to Cranston, which makes it all the more cliché for a superhero film.
Oh joy.
Other characters like Lamont Cranston and Shiwan Khan purposefully have telepathic powers, or what is called having the power to cloud men's minds, because they were taught by an ancient holy man known as the Tulku.
So yeah, the ability to cloud men's minds is the same as the Force from Star Wars. Here's what I mean.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
We don't need to see his identification.
I'll put a task force on him.
You're not going to appoint a task force.
No, hell with it. I'm not going to appoint a task force.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
You're not going to pay any attention to these reports of the Shadow.
Ignore them entirely.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
There is no Shadow.
Oh, there is no Shadow. If there were, I'd be Eleanor Roosevelt.
See what I'm saying? Like I really had to show you 3 clips of each. So again, going back to Lane, if she never even knew such a person existed, how again does she have telepathy? Then there's the character of Farley Claymore, played by Tim Curry, who works alongside Dr. Lane. Right from the start, Claymore shows his true intentions for who he works for. There are some scenes that involve him, but they don't add anything to the story. However, what Koepp did get right about the story is at least giving a background to how the Shadow came to be. Unlike other superheroes, the Shadow is what Lamont Cranston uses to fight crime. It's a dark side to him, and that is displayed at the intro where audiences are shown that at one point, Cranston was not a good guy at all. Before coming back to America, Cranston was an unfeeling, ruthless opium kingpin of Tibet. It was only until Cranston was brought to the Tulku to reverse course and become good again by mastering his dark side. This in turn makes Cranston an intriguing foil to Shi-Wan Khan, for he is exactly what Cranston used to be. That's the best part, of which both actors play off each other quite well. Another unique trait is how the Shadow gets his connections to various pieces of information using special rings. I just want to know, where the heck does he keep this stash of magic rings?
Come on, Mr. Shadow, think of it logically. I mean, you're gonna run out of them at some point. And the other thing is, too, what if one of your informants actually loses the ring? Do you have any backups?
Actors and characters. Without a doubt, the cast for this film was pretty strong, although some of them were only put to good use. Still, each character has their own personality, and that makes them identifiable. Alec Baldwin as Lamont Cranston is believable in the role and has the right voice to make his darker counterpart more intimidating, especially when he laughs maniacally.
The Shadow knows.
Even in costume, the look matches the design from the comic book, and that's commendable. Though the only part that looks a bit odd is when Baldwin changes between disguises. His nose changes. Couldn't they just keep his nose looking one way? It's just a strange transformation choice. Penelope Ann Miller as Margot Lane manages to be more than just a damsel in distress, which is good, but her chemistry with Baldwin isn't always on the same level. There is this funny scene, though, when Cranston tries to cloud Margot Lane's mind.
You will forget about me.
Why would I do that?
You will give me no further thought.
Are you drunk? Look, Mr. Cranston, I don't know what kind of woman you're used to dealing with, but I certainly don't appreciate being... Hey!
I could see the thought going through his head. Oh, crap. Thankfully, John Lone as Shi-Wan Khan is just as credible as Baldwin in his role. Whatever Lone says has the right amount of intensity for each scene that he's in. It's alluring, but dangerous all the same.
I know that inside you beats a heart of darkness. You dip into it every time you put on that hat and cloak. Join me. You are Yinko, the Butcher of Lhasa. You, and only you, deserve to be by my side.
John Lone was also the one of the major baddies from Rush Hour 2. Remember the name Ricky Tan?
God damn! What happened to Rain?
Would you like me to tell you how your father died?
Hey, wait 1 second, Lee. It ain't worth it, man. He trying to trick you. Don't go too far now.
He never begged for his life, or tried to make a deal.
Put the gun down.
For some reason, though, Lone hasn't been in a film since 2007, his last film being War. Ian McKellen as the brilliant Dr. Lane is fun watching play a supporting role, mostly because how absent-minded he is.
You know, because he's supposed to be smart and he forgets things, get it? You don't care, what the hell?
Another health issue that he has is also color blindness.
Dad, where did you get this shirt?
Well, you said I look good in green.
No. This is green. That's red.
Red, green. Well, to me, it's just a clean shirt.
Well, at that point, I think it's time for retirement, because that can be quite hazardous if in the wrong situation. Tim Curry's performance as Farley Claymore is nothing short of wrong with his talent. The only thing is, some viewers may be let down due to his placement in the film. Either Tim Curry is a villain or not. This actor has always more to give.
You don't return my calls anymore.
Well, that's not true. I never did return your calls.
I know. I can't imagine why.
It's because I don't like you.
What a fascinating woman.
Nonetheless, his acting entertains. For other minor supporting characters, there's Jonathan Winters playing Baldwin's uncle, a police commissioner, who occasionally hears of his nephew's heroics, although he has no clue that it's his nephew. For those of the young viewers, Winters was the voice of Papa Smurf from the live-action Smurf films, although that is not considered one of his better acting choices.
You know something, Lamont, that puzzles me? How a man like yourself, who has absolutely nothing to do, can be late for every little engagement.
Practice, Uncle Wainwright. Lots and lots of practice.
Waiter, get me some more chives, would you please? And, Oh, my God, here comes that Lane woman. Oh, please, I don't need her anymore. Miss Lane, how are you?
All right, you can drop the act, Commissioner.
Peter Boyle, the actor who's best known for playing the father of Ray in the Everybody Loves Raymond TV show, plays an Alfred-like character to that of Baldwin's Batman-type role. However, this Alfred is mobile. In other words, always on call for when his boss needs him using a taxi.
Out! Thank you.
What does his taxi boss say when he just randomly drops off his passengers? There are also some other scenes with a few special actors. Sab Shimono, best known for his voice work as Uncle in the Jackie Chan Adventures TV show on Kids WB, plays one of the characters that becomes the Shadow's special informants for information.
Shadow is Bronzium. I didn't think it existed, but my God, here it is.
Shimono is also the same actor who played Lord Norinaga in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3.
Yeah, the one nobody liked.
Alongside Shimono is a brief appearance from James Hong at the beginning, and Frank Welker doing his usual voice work for what is called the Purba, a living demon dagger in this film, but is actually a historic and cultural artifact in Indo-Tibetan Buddhism.
Oh, that knife.
But as for why this particular dagger has a life of its own?
Can't really explain why it is what it is.
Anyway, none of these particular individuals have any sort of development, but just taking note that they're there is important because they are credible actors. Action and cinematography. For a superhero film, the action isn't that abundant, believe it or not. Much of the story plays out like a detective case with an occasional action sequence from time to time. It does pick up some, however, after the halfway point, but that would be expected.
Because who would want to sit through a superhero movie with no action?
For action specifically, much of the energy comes from the Shadow's 2 handguns he carries on him. There are also some hand-to-hand combat moments, and that's cool to watch as well. The special effects, for the most part, look nicely integrated. It was 1994, though, so there will be some areas that don't look as well put together as what viewers would see today. Still, the use of miniatures and matte paintings is very much appreciated because it helps give a sense of the area the story takes place in. For camera work, Stephen H. Burham is credited as cinematographer. Burham was also the cinematographer to The Untouchables and Carlito's Way. As for movement, or stationary shots, the camera is very much stable, and that's great. Soundtrack and film score. Working on the music to this production was legendary composer Jerry Goldsmith. In his filmography, Goldsmith hadn't done a lot of superhero-type films, but the majority of his films had memorable themes to them. Most notably, some of his hero or anti-hero musical works belong to movies like Star Trek the Motion Picture, First Blood, and Supergirl, and this one is no exception. The main theme for The Shadow is quite unforgettable with its minor key and forceful trumpets in 4/4 time. There are synthetic sounds mixed within as well, and that gives the track a much more supernatural feel. The motif to Shiwan Khan is also recognizable with its fairly similar tune, but more reliance on full orchestra than one kind of instrument. Initially, the first musical release by Arista Records had only 46 minutes. However, in 2012, Entrada Records re-released the score with added material, making it an hour and a half. That's much closer to the film's running time. For those who like comic book and superhero film scores, this is definitely one to have. And here's why. Overall impressions. Was it a flub, or a job well done? This old-fashioned comic book superhero film may not be one of recent memory for a large percentage of contemporary viewers, but it should still be given a look. Its writing runs a bit formulaic at times, and the action isn't all too prevalent, yet the cast is largely high-end, the camera work and practical effects are well appreciated, and the music is brilliantly composed.
Hey, older comic book movies aren't for everybody, but The Shadow is a classic in its own right. It's also the character that influenced the creation of Batman. If you don't believe me, see the link below.
Just remember, even if I know you didn't see it, guess who does?
The Shadow knows.